Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the Aurora Free Libraries travel series.
My husband Ed and I wanted to go to Israel because we had never been farther east than Europe. I am delighted for this chance to share with you what was for us an opportunity to learn new things and sightsee, and additionally, to enjoy delicious meals. The pictures that I am showing you, were all ones that I took except for one. I've included information about the places we visited and some of my reactions to what we saw. So remember, this was 2018 that we took this trip. And this is where we went. Our plane landed at Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv after a 10.5-hour direct flight from Newark. We went with Go-Ahead Tours, who made all the arrangements, and from somebody from the tour office met us at the plane at the airport. This map shows our itinerary, but not our trip south toward the Dead Sea area. We were in Israel 1 week. We spent 2 nights in Tel Aviv, 1 night in Nazareth, and 4 nights in Jerusalem. To help you get oriented, this map shows the Sea of Galilee in the north and the Dead Sea on the Israeli-Jordanian border toward the south. The West Bank / occupied territory is indicated. Israel's neighbors are Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. The Jordan River is part of the eastern border with Jordan. Israel is a little larger than New Jersey. The country has a varied geography with green, well-watered areas in the north and desert, arid areas in the south, with mountains and coastal plains. We met the other tour group members for dinner the first night at the hotel in Tel Aviv, but this photo was taken at our farewell dinner in Jerusalem when we'd all gotten to know each other. There were 12 in our group. 1 person is not in the photo, plus our Israeli tour guide, Mickey. He's the one who is standing. Our group members were from New Mexico, Brooklyn, Florida, Canada, and Aurora. Our meals were buffet style with an extensive menu. Here's a mosque near our hotel in Tel Aviv. Our first full day was in Jaffa. Tel Aviv was founded in 1909 as a Jewish suburb of the ancient city of Jaffa, and they later merged into a single municipality in 1950. The date palms are all over this area, and I was intrigued by seeing how the dates grow. A cat of Jaffa. The wishing bridge. You put your hand on your zodiac sign, mine is Aries, to make a wish. I wished that no harm come to my family members. Remember the cat? Immediately after my wish, Ed reported he had reached down to pet this cat, and it gave him a nasty scratch on his left hand. So much for the effectiveness of the wishing bridge. Long story short, instead of going on the afternoon excursion, we, Edward and I, made an excursion together to the Tel Aviv hospital's emergency room, where his hand was taken care of very efficiently. After the hospital visit, we went down to the Mediterranean Sea, which was right across from our hotel in Tel Aviv. And then turning back from the sea, this is looking toward our hotel and other hotels. The next day, we traveled by bus to Caesarea. 34 miles up the Mediterranean coast north of Tel Aviv. From the modern city of Tel Aviv to the ancient palace of King Herod the Great. Caesarea is 2,000 years old and is not an inhabited city now, but is a national park. Ancient Israel, columns from the palace excavation, and modern Israel, a power plant. An aqueduct from the Roman times. Pontius Pilate's residence was here. Close-up of the historical plaque. Pontius Pilate, of course, was the Roman prefect who presided over the trial of Jesus of Nazareth. Next day, we traveled by bus up the coast to Haifa, and now we're looking down upon the Baha'i Gardens. Haifa is a large center for the Baha'i religious faith. Baha'is accept the divine nature of the missions of Abraham, Moses, Zoroaster, the Buddha, Jesus, and the Prophet Muhammad. Another view of the Baha'i Gardens. Next, farther up the coast, we're in Akko, A-K-K-O, or sometimes known as Accra, A-C-R-E, also a center of the Baha'i faith. In Akko, the Crusaders built the Knights Hospitallers fortress in the 12th century. It's being excavated and worked on. Some catapult stones in the fortress from the days of the Crusaders. An interesting tree trunk in Akko. This is Nazareth, where we stayed overnight. And this is the Church of the Annunciation, a modern Roman Catholic church. The view is from our hotel window, which explains the interesting streak of reflected light. The facade of this church, 20th century church, it is built over the place where tradition has it that Mary had her home and received the announcement from the angel Gabriel that she would bear a son. So the name Church of the Annunciation. Different countries have contributed windows representing the Virgin Mary. This is from Japan. Another one probably from Mexico. But underneath the modern church is the Grotto of the Annunciation, believed to be the remains of the original childhood home of Mary. This is also in Nazareth Souvenirs. Across the street from this store was a stand selling delicious pomegranate juice. And we heard the call to prayer while on this street in Nazareth. Our next stop was Capernaum, our only stop on the Sea of Galilee. That was the next day. It is 46 miles from Nazareth. And I guess you are getting the idea that distances in Israel are not that great. The day was nice, not too hot, and there were hardly any other visitors. And this is the Sea of Galilee, also known as Lake Tiberias and Kinneret. The lake is freshwater, it's below sea level. It's Israel's largest source of fresh drinking water. The Jordan River flows through it. But Israel, at that time that we were there in 2018, was experiencing a 5-year drought, our guide told us. And the drought, combined with excessive water use for irrigation, means the Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea, and the Jordan River are drying up. This was very distressing to hear. Hopeful footnote from 2021. This is from the Times of Israel. quote, after an especially rainy winter, this 2020-21, the Sea of Galilee is at its highest level in 2 decades, unquote. However, a dam holds back water at the south end of the Sea of Galilee and currently prevents water from flowing out of the lake into the Jordan River and thence down into the Dead Sea. So the Dead Sea is not being replenished. This, the remains of a 4th century synagogue in Capernaum was built over an older one, the one where Jesus preached. So there's a column, and you can see a menorah on one side of it. These are 1st century fishermen's houses in Capernaum that were excavated. As the family expanded, another room was built on. Roofing was palm fronds. A modern church you see in the background, dedicated to St. Peter, who lived in Capernaum, sits over part of the excavations. It's the road from Capernaum to Jericho heading south. The landscape, as you can see, gets more arid. Above Jericho sits the mountain of temptation, where it is said in the Gospels that Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days tempted by the devil. We went up it by cable car, and this is a view from the cable car platform, but the cable car does not go to the top of that forbidding rock cliff. There is a Greek Orthodox monastery on the side of the mountain, which I wish I had gotten a picture of, but I didn't. It's sort of almost, you just can't believe how people would get up there. And in the background, you see a view of Jericho from the cable car platform. We had lunch at a restaurant in Jericho. Jericho is in the West Bank, which explains the Palestinian flag. We traveled from Jericho to Jerusalem. Again, not a great distance, 15 miles. Our first stop in Jerusalem was the top of the Mount of Olives, overlooking the city. Same view. We're looking toward the old city of Jerusalem, sacred to Christians, Jews, and Muslims. In part of the old city, what Jews call the Temple Mount is located. This was the site of Solomon's temple and later the Second Temple. And as you probably remember, the Second Temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. Muslims call this same site Haram al-Sharif, or Noble Sanctuary. It is where the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the 3rd holiest site in Islam, is located. Also, on the Haram al-Sharif is the Dome of the Rock, an Islamic shrine built in the 7th century. And that is the golden dome that you see prominently on the horizon. And what you see in the foreground is the oldest active burial site in the world and home to 150,000 Jewish graves. It is considered important to be buried close to the city walls. It's forbidden to be buried within the city. In a separate area of Jerusalem near the wall, there are Muslim graves as well. Another view. About 2 miles below the Mount of Olives is the Garden of Gethsemane, where, according to the Gospels, Jesus went to pray after the Last Supper. In the garden are 8 olive trees. The trees' trunks are hollow, with newer growth sprouting around the base of the trunks. Gethsemane means oil press in Aramaic. These olives are still harvested and pressed. Some of the oil is used for liturgical purposes. And I found out on the internet, reading the Olive Oil Times, that the Franciscan friars of the custody, mostly Italians, take care of the olive trees with the support of experts. And they are healthy trees. I was glad to hear that. The same tree trunk, but a close-up. These trees are at least 900 years old, but the roots may be older. The original trees were destroyed by the Romans. You can look into, but not walk in the garden. To me, it was one of the most meaningful places I visited because the trees are living witnesses to so much history. Another view of the garden. Oh, this is a scale model of Jerusalem, showing how scholars think it might have looked right before the Romans destroyed the city. The model is part of the Israel Museum. The scale is 50:1. It was originally commissioned for the Holy Land Hotel and was later relocated to the Israel Museum in 2006. The model covers nearly 1 acre. And here's a close-up of the second temple from the model. The area the temple stood on was enlarged by Herod the Great. He had retaining walls built, one of which was the Western Wall. And I don't know which one is the Western Wall in this model. However, we visited the real, actual Western Wall. It's what remained exposed after the destruction of the temple and has become a place of Jewish prayer for centuries. Is one of Judaism's holiest sites. Anyone can go up and touch it and write a prayer on a piece of paper and put the prayer into a crack in the wall, which I did. The pieces of paper, as you can imagine, become so numerous that they fall out, and they are collected periodically and are buried, we were told. A barrier separates, I think you can see it there, the access for men and for women to the wall. They're separate access. This is Yad Vashem, Israel's official memorial to the victims of the Holocaust. It consists of the Holocaust History Museum, which you see, the Children's Memorial, and a garden recognizing non-Jews who had chosen to save Jews, all three of which we visited. Here's our group going into the museum. You can't take pictures inside the Holocaust History Museum. So this photo is from the Yad Vashem website. In it, many audiovisual exhibits describe Holocaust survivors' experiences. I wrote this down from something that I heard. It is words spoken by a woman who was interviewed. What she said was chilling. Quote, she said, "My mother called her Gentile friends. She had more Gentile friends than Jewish after Kristallnacht, and no one answered," unquote. Kristallnacht, as you may recall, was November 9th and 10th, 1938, when Nazis in Germany torched synagogues, vandalized Jewish homes, schools, and businesses, and killed close to 100 Jews. At the end of the museum is this beautiful vista when you come out. And here's the Garden of the Righteous at Yad Vashem. A couple of our group members taking pictures. We took a walk through the old city of Jerusalem. This is the Muslim quarter. The old city is divided into 4 quarters: Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and Armenian. Here's a map of the old city from a recent Economist magazine. You can see where the Temple Mount and the Haram al-Sharif are part of the old city, but not exactly in it. This may be a gate, but I don't know what gate it might have been. This is the Via Dolorosa, Latin for sorrowful way or way of suffering, believed to be the path Jesus walked on the way to his crucifixion. Through this present streets of Jerusalem, you can follow that path. This is very intriguing to me. Pavement was uncovered, revealing what is thought to be lines and squares scratched in the stone by Roman soldiers for playing games. Can this be true? This is one of the gates, the Zion Gate. The old city is surrounded by a wall, and there are 8 gates. And as you can see, the signs are in Hebrew, Arabic, and English. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, one of Christendom's holiest sites, the site of Jesus' crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. We learned that 6 Christian groups have claims to the church. Nothing can be changed or repaired without the agreement of all parties. It is a 250-year-old agreement. Some of the parties are the Greek Orthodox, the Roman Catholics, Armenians, Copts, Syrian Jacobites, and Ethiopians. I think I got all 6. This is a close-up of the church showing a ladder. No agreement has been reached among the 6 parties about who owns the ladder. So they say it has been there since the 18th century. The Crusaders, whose extensive 12th century work makes up the bulk of what the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is today, were driven out in 1187. And the last one to leave gave the keys to a Muslim neighbor, so whose descendants still hold the keys. Mickey, our guide, told us this story and said a member of this key-holding family greeted him in front of the church. This rock tomb, one of many under the church, may be like the one of Joseph of Arimathea, where Jesus was laid to rest. In the 1st century, it would have been outside the walls of the city, so could have been a burial site. This is another street in Jerusalem near King David's tomb. The next day, we visited Bethlehem, which is only 6 or 7 miles from Jerusalem. These stairs, I'm pretty sure, lead to the Grotto, the site of the birth of Jesus. This is actually what is thought to be the site of the birth of Jesus in the Church of the Nativity at this point. Another view of the Church of the Nativity. Huge church. Bethlehem is administered by the Palestinian Authority. Signs are only in Arabic, except, of course, Coca-Cola and KFC. Traveling south, we came to Masada, a national park. It is near the border with Jordan. It is a rock formation, as you can see, like a mesa. This mural in the visitor center shows how it may have looked in the 1st century AD. Following the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, a Jewish group, the Zealots and their families, fled to this mountaintop, which was actually King Herod's palace, a former palace of King Herod, and they hid out there. 8,000 Romans laid siege against 960 zealot rebels. When it became clear that the Romans were going to overrun Masada, all the people took their own lives or killed each other rather than live as Roman slaves. The siege of Masada is often revered in modern Israel as a symbol of Jewish heroism, a symbol that played a role in forging the national identity. And this is what I was just quoted is from Wikipedia. We got to the top of Masada in a cable car. We learned that there's more than one very steep path that can be taken through the rocks to the top. This is the remains, and some have been reconstructed. It was actually a small city on top of the rock. And there were cisterns that we saw to catch rainwater, and there were food storage areas. It wasn't that the people ran out of food and water, it was that the Romans had built a ramp close enough to the side of the palace and were about to break in and capture the people up there. It is thought that the siege lasted 4 to 7 months or less. This is a view from Masada of what are probably Bedouin settlements below. And looking in another direction from Masada, we see the Dead Sea. The sea, as I said, has shrunk and is continuing to shrink because it is not replenished by the Jordan River, which used to flow into it. The area in the photo below in front was formerly covered with water. It was so hot that our visit was shortened. It was middle of the day and the sun was beating down, so we went back to the visitor center. And the bus drove us south to a hotel near the southern end of the Dead Sea for lunch. Almost nothing lives in the Dead Sea, but a few microorganisms. The water is hot. It's not just warm. You can float but not swim. And the shore is the lowest place on the surface of the earth. Ed and I went wading. The sand was so hot you needed to wear sandals. Now, this is the Dead Sea from the bus as we were traveling to our next stop, which was the Bedouin settlement called Kfar Hanokdim. And in that settlement, our group sat on rugs under a tent where a resident of the settlement prepared coffee for us and told us something about the people. Most Bedouins are no longer nomadic, and most are Sunni Muslim. Pomegranate tree. We took a camel ride. 2 people get on at once. It's very high up. The camels sway from side to side. Luckily for me, anyway, a resident led the camels around. This was our dinner at Kfar Hanokdim. Very delicious food, no alcohol, grape leaves, hummus, Mediterranean type food. Road from the settlement back to Jerusalem. This trip south to Masada, the Dead Sea, and Kfar Hanokdim and back was the longest of our visit. Places are generally close together in Israel. This is a sunset view from our hotel, saying goodbye to Jerusalem. The next day, we were driven from Jerusalem back to the airport at Tel Aviv. It's about 29 miles. And from there, we flew to Newark, an 11.5-hour trip. The flight was an hour longer than our trip over. then from Newark to Syracuse, and from Syracuse home to Aurora, where the sun also sets at the top. That's the end.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Louise, that was excellent. I enjoyed it greatly. I hope everyone else did. Did anyone have any questions? Here's one question from Becca. Does the country feel crowded?
Pardon?
Does the country feel crowded?
Yes, it does. But not in the desert areas. Which
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, Becca, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. It seemed like it was either very urban or completely desert. Is that kind of true?
Well, maybe where we went, we did go to those smaller towns of well, Jaffa isn't that small, but let's see if I can up the coast, the Haifa and Akko, which seemed like they were not that crowded, but I guess the crowded feeling was definitely in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Streets are very narrow, and there were a lot of people there. It was the middle of August. Even though the heat was pretty bad, I think there were a lot of tourists as visiting.
And one other question, it was pretty sunny and there was no rain while you were there, right?
Absolutely no rain, no sign of rain, no. I think this is that August is the dry season, and if I'm correct, I think that right now should be the rainy season. And as I said, I was heartened to hear that they had gotten more rain in the northern part near the Sea of Galilee area this year, and maybe the past year, 2018, apparently was very dry.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Hi, Louise. Thank
Hi.
you so much. Hello, it's Monica and Sandy.
Hi, Monica.
Thanks so much for doing this. We were
Oh,
wondering,
you're very welcome.
you were talking about those wonderful olive trees in the Garden of Gethsemane. Are those the actual olive trees from 2,000 years ago that would have been the same one?
Well,
Or they've just been growing around
all right.
each other?
Probably it's thought that maybe some of the shoots from the trees survived after they were cut down or burned or whatever the Romans did to them in 70 AD. And then people afterwards cared for them. I read that. They were not totally neglected throughout time. So people realized their significance and probably kept them going. So the answer is nobody knows. But maybe we can think that that's true, because olive trees apparently live a very long time. Maybe they live 2,000 years. So if we want to think that, we can.
All right, does anyone else have any more questions?
I do. This is Rebecca again, Louise.
Hi, Rebecca.
So how confident, when you were touring these sites that are supposed to be associated with the Christian story,
Yeah.
how confident where you said several times things like, you know, believed to be the
Right.
childhood home of Mary and that sort of thing. And how much history lies behind those statements? Do you know?
Well, it's both history and tradition. I mean, it's probably possible that a home that was displayed under the Church of the Annunciation, maybe that was how people in the time of Mary lived. So you can conjecture that that was the type of home that she lived in. But I'm not an authority on Christian sites. I think that there's so much tradition overlaid onto history that it's difficult to tell. There's a lot of there is a lot of digging. You could see that there was excavation at Capernaum, and which had revealed the fishermen's houses, thought to be of the 1st century, and possibly one of them was Peter, St. Peter's house.
Uh-huh. And the Garden of Gethsemane, that would be a definite location. Is that right?
Even that is not definite from what I've tried to do a little research. I'm not an expert, but the trees, I mean, it was, since it's a Mediterranean area, there were probably olive trees all over. They grew easily, and people had olive orchards probably. So I'm not sure how they have zeroed in on that particular site, but the tradition is so old that I would like to think that yes, it is the original Garden of Gethsemane.
I have one other question, Louise. It seemed so interesting. Jerusalem has been a place that's been sacred to very different cultures and religions for so long, and we've been hearing in the news recently of the, you know, conflicts and unrest that's going on. When you were there, did you detect just kind of a historic piece of many cultures and religions, say, sharing that one church or location for so long, or was there some of that ill will that, you know, has politically been going on for so long?
Well, no, we didn't sense any feeling of conflict. And we were only in the old city. We didn't go to East Jerusalem, which is just outside of, to the east, I guess, of the old city. And the old city has so many churches and sites that are administered by these different denominations. As I said, the 6 that administer the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It sounds like that there is conflict but among those denominations as to who does what and who's really in charge, and is somebody else stepping on their turf type thing. But I did not sense, I wasn't fearful at all. We stayed with our group, but I think if somehow I'd gotten lost, which would have been quite easy, I would have just called a taxi and given the name of our hotel, and everything would have worked out. So no, as far as seeing military, no, I didn't see any.
All right, in that case.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Louise.
Thank you very much, Louise.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.